Jiwoo stood in the observation deck of the colony ship, staring at the planet below. Krava 9 looked beautiful from space. Red plains stretched across continents, interrupted by dark mountain ranges and silver rivers. But she knew the truth about this world. She knew what Director Taemin was hiding from everyone. Her hands shook as she held the data pad. The numbers were clear. The atmosphere contained trace amounts of a toxic compound that the initial surveys had missed. It would not kill the colonists immediately. Instead, it would poison them slowly over years, damaging their lungs and hearts. Children born on this planet would suffer the most. She had discovered this 3 weeks ago while running additional tests. At first, she thought it was a mistake in her equipment, but after checking and rechecking, the truth was undeniable. Jiwoo had taken her findings to Director Taemin immediately, expecting him to halt the colonization plans. Instead, he had smiled at her coldly and told her to delete her research. "We've come too far to turn back now," Taemin had said. "The Colonial Authority has invested billions in this mission. Thousands of people are already in cryosleep, waiting to start their new lives. Do you want to be the one who destroys their dreams?" "I want to save their lives," Jiwoo had replied. That conversation had been her biggest mistake. Now 2 security officers stood behind her. One of them was Sung-ho, a man she had shared meals with in the crew cafeteria. They had talked about their families back on Earth, about their hopes for the future. Now he would not even look at her. "Dr. Jiwoo," said the other officer, "you need to come with us." She turned away from the planet view. "Where are we going?" "Director Taemin has called an emergency council meeting. You've been summoned?" Jiwoo's stomach tightened. She knew this was not going to be a normal meeting. Taemin had spent the last 3 weeks building a case against her. She had seen the way other crew members looked at her now with suspicion and fear. The council chamber was full when they arrived. All 15 council members sat in their seats, their faces serious. Director Taemin stood at the head of the table, and next to him was Dr. Hyejin, Jiwoo's former mentor and friend. Hyejin would not meet her eyes. "Dr. Jiwoo," Taemin began, his voice formal, "you stand accused of sabotaging the ship's life support systems and attempting to destroy this mission through the spread of false information and panic." Jiwoo felt the room spin. "That's a lie. I never—" "We have evidence," Taemin interrupted. He activated a holographic display. It showed logs from the ship's computer systems, supposedly proving that Jiwoo had accessed restricted areas and tampered with vital equipment. "Your workstation was used to input commands that would have vented atmosphere from 3 residential sections. Fortunately, our security systems caught the attempt before any harm was done." "I never did that," Jiwoo shouted. "Those logs are fake." "You know they're fake. We also have testimony," Taemin continued calmly, "from multiple crew members who heard you expressing desires to sabotage the mission. Dr. Hyejin, would you please share what Dr. Jiwoo told you last week?" Hyejin finally looked up. Her eyes were red as if she had been crying. "Jiwoo told me that she wished the mission would fail," Hyejin said quietly. "She said that the colonists deserved to know the truth even if it meant destroying everything we've worked for." "That's not what I said." Jiwoo turned to her mentor desperately. "Hyejin, please. You know I only wanted to protect people. I wanted us to find a solution, not abandon the mission." But Hyejin looked away again. The council deliberated for only 20 minutes. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. Jiwoo would be exiled to the planet's surface. It was the harshest punishment possible, short of execution. Everyone knew that nothing survived long on Krava 9's surface. The planet was home to massive predators that the crew had observed from orbit. The largest creatures stood 12 feet tall, with 6 legs and crystalline horns that glowed in the darkness. "You can't do this," Jiwoo said, her voice breaking. "This is murder." "This is justice," Taemin replied. "You threatened the lives of everyone on this ship. Be grateful we're giving you any chance at all. You'll be provided with a basic survival suit and an emergency beacon. If you survive for 30 days, we'll consider a rescue." Jiwoo knew the beacon would not work. She could see it in Taemin's eyes. This was an execution dressed up as exile. They took her to the drop pod bay. Sung-ho walked beside her, still refusing to make eye contact. As they fitted her into the survival suit, Jiwoo tried one last time. "Sung-ho, you know me. You know I would never hurt anyone. Please, you have to listen. I have my orders," he said flatly. The survival suit was basic. It would regulate her temperature and provide clean air for 72 hours. After that, she would need to breathe the planet's atmosphere directly, the toxic atmosphere that would slowly kill her. She had a water recycler, a small medical kit, and a knife. No weapons. No advanced technology. The emergency beacon was clipped to her belt. Jiwoo checked it quickly and confirmed her suspicions. The transmitter had been disabled. No one would hear her calls for help. As they sealed the pod, Jiwoo caught one final glimpse of the corridor outside. Dr. Heejin stood there, tears streaming down her face. Their eyes met for a moment. Hyejin mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," but it was too late for apologies. The pod launched. Jiwoo felt the acceleration press her into the seat as the small craft fell toward Krava 9. Through the small window, she watched the colony ship grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared among the stars. Below her, the red planes rushed up to meet her. The pod's computer announced that landing would occur in the Crimson Wastes, a vast savanna region that thermal scans had identified as a hunting ground for the apex predators. Of course, they had programmed it to drop her there. Taemin wanted to make sure she died quickly. The parachutes deployed with a violent jerk. Then the retro rockets fired, slowing her descent. The pod hit the ground hard and Jiwoo's head slammed against the seat despite the restraints. Pain exploded behind her eyes. For a moment, she sat there in the darkness, bleeding from a cut on her forehead. Then the pod's door blew open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Jiwoo unbuckled herself and stepped out onto an alien world. The sky above was a deep purple, tinged with orange at the horizon where the system's sun was setting. The ground beneath her feet was covered in red vegetation that crunched like dried leaves. In the distance, she could see rock formations jutting up from the plains like broken teeth. The air smelled strange, like copper and something organic she could not identify. Jiwoo activated her suit's analyzer. As she expected, the toxic compounds were present in the atmosphere. She had perhaps 3 days before the suit's filters would fail. After that, every breath would be poison. She stood there for a long moment, feeling the weight of her situation. Everyone she had trusted had betrayed her. She was alone on a hostile planet, surrounded by predators with no hope of rescue. But Jiwoo had not survived years of academic competition and field research by giving up easily. If she was going to die, she would die on her feet, fighting until her last breath. She pulled out the knife and checked the medical kit. Then she looked around at the darkening landscape, searching for shelter. In the distance, something roared. It was a sound that made her bones vibrate, a sound of something massive and hungry. Jiwoo started walking toward the rock formations. She had perhaps an hour of daylight left. She needed to find a place to hide before the predators came hunting. Behind her, the drop pod sat empty and silent, already half covered in the strange red vegetation. It looked like a grave marker, but Jiwoo was not dead yet. Jiwoo found the cave system just as the last light faded from the sky. The entrance was a narrow crack between two massive boulders, barely wide enough for her to squeeze through. Inside, the cave opened into a larger chamber that smelled of dust and old stone. She used her suit's built-in light to explore. The cave was empty, which was both good and bad. Good because nothing was living here currently. Bad because it meant the predators knew about this place and might return. Jiwoo wedged herself into the deepest corner and tried to sleep. Every sound outside made her heart race. She heard things moving in the darkness, heavy footsteps that made the ground tremble. Once, something large passed by the cave entrance, blocking out the starlight completely. She survived her first night. When morning came, Jiwoo carefully emerged from her hiding place. The purple sky had shifted to a pale blue-green color. The sun rose quickly, bringing heat that made the red vegetation steam. She needed water. The suit's recycler could process her sweat and waste, but it was not designed for long-term use. She needed to find a natural water source. Jiwoo climbed to the top of the nearest rock formation to get a better view. From up high, she could see for miles across the crimson wastes. The red plains stretched to the horizon in every direction, broken only by occasional rock outcrops and what looked like a forest of tall, twisted trees in the distance. Then she saw them. 6 creatures moved across the plains below, traveling in a tight group. They were the apex predators she had seen in the orbital surveys, but seeing them in person was completely different. Each one was at least 12 feet tall at the shoulder. They had 6 legs, 3 on each side, that moved in a smooth, rippling motion. Their bodies were covered in scales that looked black in some light and deep blue in others. From their heads grew crystalline horns that caught the sunlight and seemed to glow from within. Jiwoo watched them hunt. They surrounded a herd of smaller creatures that looked like six-legged deer. The predators moved with coordination that suggested intelligence, not just instinct. 3 of them circled left while 2 went right, and 1 waited directly ahead. The prey animals were trapped perfectly. The hunt was over in seconds. The lead predator struck with its horns, which discharged some kind of electrical energy. The prey animal collapsed and the pack fed. But what happened next surprised Jiwoo even more. The predators did not fight over the kill. Instead, they waited, letting the smallest member of the pack eat first. Then the others took turns, each one eating in what seemed like a specific order. They have a social structure, Jiwoo whispered to herself. They're not just animals. They're organized. She watched the pack for over an hour, taking mental notes. The creatures communicated through low sounds she could barely hear, and through patterns of light that flickered across their scales. When one of them spotted something interesting, its scales would pulse with color, and the others would look in that direction. They were talking to each other. Jiwoo's scientific curiosity temporarily overwhelmed her fear. These creatures were intelligent. Not human level perhaps, but far more advanced than anyone had realized from orbit. She climbed down from the rock, planning to search for water while the pack was distracted with their meal. But she had only walked a few hundred yards when she realized her mistake. One of the predators had circled around behind her. Jiwoo froze. The creature stood 50 feet away, its massive head lowered, amber eyes fixed on her. It was alone, separated from the pack. A hunter that had noticed her watching them. Her mind raced through options. Running was pointless. These creatures could move at incredible speed. Fighting was suicide. The thing weighed several tons and had horns that could discharge electricity. So Jiwoo did something that went against every human instinct. She stood her ground. She made herself as large as possible. Spreading her arms wide, she took a deep breath and roared at the creature with every bit of air in her lungs. The sound was pathetic compared to the predator's earlier roar, but it was something. It was defiance. The creature stopped. Its head tilted to one side and the crystalline horns pulsed with a soft blue light. The scales along its back rippled with colors that Jiwoo could not interpret. They stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. Then the creature made a sound, a low vibration that Jiwoo felt in her chest more than heard with her ears. Its scales flashed in a complex pattern and it turned away, walking back toward its pack. Jiwoo collapsed to her knees, shaking. The predator had let her live. It had looked at her, assessed her, and decided she was not worth killing. Or perhaps it had decided she was interesting. Over the next 2 days, Jiwoo established a routine. She found a stream of clean water flowing from underground springs near her cave. She discovered that some of the red vegetation was edible, though it tasted terrible. She learned to recognize the signs of the predator's approach, the way smaller animals went silent, the vibrations in the ground, and the predators kept watching her. She would glimpse them in the distance, always the same pack. They never approached too closely, but they were always there, observing. Jiwoo realized she had become something fascinating to them. She was small and weak by their standards, but she had not run. She had not died. She was an anomaly. On the 4th day, everything changed. Jiwoo was gathering the edible plants near the stream when she heard a different kind of roar. It was higher-pitched and more aggressive than the sounds the pack made. She looked up and saw something massive moving through the red vegetation toward the water. It was not one of the 6-legged predators. This creature was different. It had a long serpentine body covered in bone-like plates. Its head was all jaws and teeth, and it moved by sliding across the ground like a snake. But it was easily 40 feet long. Jiwoo remembered this creature from the orbital surveys. The research team had called them bone renders. They were solitary hunters that could kill even the 6-legged predators in one-on-one combat. The bone render had not seen her yet. It was focused on something else. As Jiwoo watched in horror, she realized the pack of 6-legged predators was nearby, drinking at another part of the stream. And 2 of them were juveniles, smaller than the others. The bone render struck without warning. It moved with shocking speed for something so large, lunging at one of the young predators. The pack reacted immediately, but the bone render was between them and their young. Jiwoo did not think. She just acted. She ran toward the stream, screaming and waving her arms. The bone render's head swiveled toward her, distracted by the new threat. In that moment of distraction, the adult predators charged. But the bone render was powerful. It coiled its body and struck one of the adults, sending it flying. Another adult dodged its jaws but was caught by its tail. The two juveniles were trapped against a rock outcrop, unable to escape. Jiwoo saw a loose boulder above the outcrop. Without thinking about the danger, she climbed the rocks and pushed. The boulder was far too heavy for her to move under normal circumstances, but fear and adrenaline gave her strength. She found a smaller rock and used it as a lever, jamming it under the boulder. The boulder shifted. Then it rolled, gathering speed as it tumbled down the outcrop. It missed the juveniles by inches and slammed into the bone render's head with a sickening crack. The creature screamed and released the adult it had been crushing. It thrashed wildly, confused and injured. The pack seized the opportunity. All four adults attacked together, their horns discharging electrical energy in coordinated strikes. The bone render tried to fight back, but it was outnumbered and wounded. Finally it retreated, sliding away through the red vegetation, leaving a trail of dark blood. Jiwoo climbed down from the rocks, her hands shaking. The pack gathered around the two juveniles, checking them for injuries. Then, as one, they all turned to look at her. The largest predator approached. This one was different from the others. Its scales had streaks of silver among the black and blue, and its horns were longer. Jiwoo guessed it was the oldest, the leader of the pack. The matriarch stopped a few feet away. Her scales pulsed with colors, blue, green, gold. Her horns hummed with a low frequency that made the air vibrate. Jiwoo stood still, meeting the creature's amber eyes. Slowly, deliberately, the matriarch lowered her massive head until it was level with Jiwoo's. The gesture was unmistakable. In the body language of dominance and submission that existed across species, this was recognition. Not as prey. Not as a threat, as an equal. The matriarch made a sound, a deep vibration that seemed to say, "You are seen." Then the pack turned and walked away, the juveniles safe between the adults. But before they disappeared into the distance, the matriarch looked back at Jiwoo one more time. An invitation. Jiwoo watched them go, her mind racing. She had just saved the pack's young. She had proven herself in the most fundamental way possible. She had shown courage, intelligence, and the willingness to risk her life for others. In the language of predators, she had just declared herself pack. As the sun set on her fourth day on Krava 9, Jiwoo returned to her cave. But everything had changed. She was no longer just trying to survive, she was becoming something new. 3 months had passed since Jiwoo's exile, though she had stopped counting the exact days. Time moved differently when you lived with predators. She no longer slept in the cave alone. The pack had accepted her fully, and she traveled with them across their territory. She had learned to read their scale patterns like language, to understand the vibrations that carried meaning through the ground. They had learned to interpret her gestures and spoken words. Communication had been the key to everything. Jiwoo sat on a flat rock, carving patterns into the stone with her knife. Around her, 3 members of the pack rested in the afternoon heat. The matriarch, whom Jiwoo had started calling Elder, watched with interest as Jiwoo worked. The pattern Jiwoo carved was simple: a circle representing the sun, lines for the days, and marks for water sources. She was teaching them to record information in a way that would last. Elder moved closer, her massive head hovering over the stone. Her scales rippled with colors that Jiwoo now understood meant curiosity and approval. The matriarch extended one claw and carefully traced the pattern, learning the shape of it. "Yes," Jiwoo said softly. "These marks tell a story. They remember things for us." She had discovered that the pack already had a form of art. They carved patterns into rocks in certain places, marking territory and recording important events. But their carvings were instinctive, passed down through generations without understanding why. Jiwoo was teaching them to use symbols intentionally, to create new meanings. In return, they taught her how to survive on this world. They showed her which plants were safe to eat and which would make her sick. They taught her to read the weather by watching the behavior of small creatures. They protected her from other predators that wandered into their territory, and they showed her their history. Elder led Jiwoo to a cave system far different from her first shelter. This place was sacred to the pack, a chamber deep underground where the walls were covered in ancient carvings. By the light of Ji-Woo's suit, she examined the patterns. The carvings told a story that made her heart race. They showed the pack's ancestors looking up at the sky. They showed something falling from above, something small. And they showed that small thing changing everything. "You've seen humans before," Ji-Woo whispered, running her fingers over the ancient marks. "Or something like us." Elder's scales pulsed with deep blue, a color Ji-Woo had learned meant affirmation or truth. The matriarch guided her to another section of the wall. Here the carvings showed the small sky creature teaching the ancestors new things: how to hunt together better, how to use rocks and sticks as tools, how to think beyond the immediate moment. The final carving showed the small creature surrounded by the pack, elevated above them. Rays like a sun spread from its form, the soft skin who burns, the small creature filled with thinking fire. "You were waiting for me," Ji-Woo said, understanding flooding through her. "Not me specifically, but someone like me. You've been watching the ships in orbit for years, waiting for one of us to come down." Elder's scales flashed in complex patterns that Ji-Woo interpreted as agreement mixed with something else. Hope, perhaps, or destiny. Ji-Woo spent weeks working with the pack, sharing everything she knew. She showed them how to use leverage to move heavy objects, how to dig channels to redirect water, how to set up coordinated ambushes using the terrain more effectively. The pack learned with shocking speed. Each member seemed to absorb knowledge and then share it with the others through their scale patterns and low-frequency communications. But not everyone accepted her. Hyo-jin was the leader of a neighboring pack, and he did not trust the small soft skin. He was younger than Elder but larger, with darker scales and more aggressive patterns. His pack often clashed with Elder's pack over territory and hunting grounds. When Hyo-jin first saw Ji-Woo, his scales flashed with red and orange, colors that meant threat and challenge. He approached with his head low and horns crackling with energy. Elder placed herself between them, her own scales flashing in warning. The two pack leaders faced each other, and for a moment Ji-Woo thought they would fight. Instead, Hyo-jin made a sound that Ji-Woo had come to understand as a formal challenge. His scales pulsed with a pattern that demanded proof. He wanted to know why this weak creature deserved a place in the pack. "He wants to test you," Ji-Woo said aloud, though she was speaking mostly to herself. "Fine, I'll prove it." She stepped out from behind Elder and the matriarch reluctantly moved aside. Ji-Woo knew this had to happen eventually. Hyo-jin was not wrong to question her. In a world of predators, strength and ability determined your place. But she could not win through physical strength. Hyo-jin circled her slowly, his massive body tense and ready. Ji-Woo studied him carefully. She had spent 3 months observing how the pack moved, how they fought, how they thought. She understood their patterns now. When Hyo-jin lunged, Ji-Woo was ready. She dove aside at the last moment, using her smaller size to her advantage. Hyo-jin's momentum carried him past her, his jaws snapping on empty air. He turned quickly, surprised but not deterred. He charged again, and again Ji-Woo dodged. But this time, she grabbed a long stick from the ground as she moved. Hyo-jin's third charge was more careful. He tried to corner her against a rock formation. But Ji-Woo used the stick to vault onto a higher ledge, moving in ways the larger predator could not follow. From above, she studied the terrain. There was a pattern here, a way to win. She noticed a loose patch of gravel on a slope, held in place by a few larger rocks. She noticed the position of the sun, casting shadows that made depth hard to judge. She noticed everything. "Come on," she shouted at Hyo-jin. "You want to prove I'm weak? Come prove it." Hyo-jin roared and climbed after her. But Ji-Woo was already moving, running along the narrow ledge. She kicked at the larger rocks, sending them tumbling. The gravel shifted and began to slide. Hyo-jin realized the danger too late. The entire slope gave way beneath him in a small avalanche of loose stone. He tumbled down, roaring in frustration and surprise. When the dust cleared, Hyo-jin lay at the bottom of the slope, covered in gravel but unhurt. Ji-Woo stood above him on solid ground. She had not hurt him. She had not even tried to hurt him. But she had outsmarted him, outmaneuvered him, and shown him that strength came in many forms. Hyo-jin rose slowly, shaking the gravel from his scales. For a long moment he stared up at Ji-Woo. Then his scales shifted from aggressive red and orange to thoughtful blue and green. He lowered his head in the gesture of recognition that Elder had first shown Ji-Woo months ago. From that day forward, Hyo Jin's pack joined with Elder's pack when Jiwoo traveled through their territory. Word spread to other packs across the region. They came to see the soft skin who burns, the small creature who thought like fire and taught the packs new ways to survive. They began calling her Kiva Ren in their own language. Small goddess. Tiny thinking fire Jiwoo taught them everything she could. She showed them how to preserve meat by drying it in the sun, how to create simple tools, how to plan hunts days in advance instead of just following instinct. She taught them to think not just about the next meal but about the next season, the next generation. In return, they gave her purpose. They gave her belonging. They gave her something the colony never had: complete acceptance without conditions or politics. One evening, as the purple sky filled with stars, Jiwoo sat with Elder on a cliff overlooking the crimson wastes. Below them, dozens of pack members rested together, the traditional boundaries between packs dissolving as they learned to cooperate. Elder's scales pulsed with patterns that Jiwoo now understood completely. The matriarch was asking a question. Will you leave when the Sky Pack calls you back? Jiwoo looked up at the stars, knowing the colony ship was still up there somewhere orbiting. For 3 months she had waited for rescue that never came. At first it had hurt. She had felt abandoned and betrayed all over again. But now, sitting with Elder under an alien sky, surrounded by creatures who had accepted her without question, Jiwoo realized something important. No, she said, answering both Elder's question and her own doubts. I'm not going back. This is my home now. You are my pack. Elder's scales flashed with colors that meant joy and belonging. The matriarch pressed her massive head gently against Jiwoo's shoulder, careful not to hurt the small human. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars appear one by one. Jiwoo thought about the people on the colony ship. She thought about Taemin and his lies, about Hyejin and her betrayal, about Sungho and his refusal to see the truth. She thought about all the ways they had tried to make her small and quiet and obedient. They had cast her out to die. Instead, she had become something greater than she had ever been among her own kind. She had become a teacher, a leader, a bridge between species. She had become Kiva Ren. In the distance, young pack members practiced the hunting techniques she had taught them. They carved symbols into rocks, recording the day's events. They worked together in ways that none of them had done before she arrived. Jiwoo smiled. Let the colony keep their ships and their politics and their small-minded leaders. She had found something better. She had found a family that measured worth not by status or credentials, but by courage and contribution. She had found acceptance that did not require her to compromise. 6 months after Jiwoo's exile, the colony ship was dying. Director Taemin stood in the medical bay watching doctors treat another patient suffering from the atmospheric toxins. The woman was young, barely 20, and she could not stop coughing. Her lungs were failing, just as Jiwoo had predicted. Taemin turned away from the sight. He had convinced himself that Jiwoo's warnings were exaggerated, that the toxins would not affect people for years. He had been wrong. People were getting sick now and the medical supplies were running low, but admitting he was wrong would mean losing everything. His position, his power, his future. So instead, he had found a different solution. The planet's surface contained rich deposits of rare minerals, concentrated in the same region where the apex predators lived. Those minerals could be used to build better atmospheric processors, ones that could filter out the toxins. They could save the colony. All they had to do was take the land from the predators. Captain Insu studied the tactical displays in the military command center. He was a career officer, trained for combat and crisis management. When Taemin had ordered him to prepare a surface expedition, he had followed orders without question. Now looking at the mission parameters, he felt uneasy. 200 soldiers and workers, he said aloud. Heavy weapons, demolition charges, and chemical dispersal systems. Director, this looks like an invasion force. It's a resource extraction team, Taemin replied smoothly. The weapons are for protection. The creatures down there are dangerous. The creatures are intelligent, Insu countered. The observation teams have recorded coordinated behavior, tool use, and what might be language. We should attempt communication before they're animals, Captain. Dangerous animals that happen to be smart. Would you negotiate with a pack of wolves? Taemin's voice grew harder. The colony is dying. People are sick. We need those minerals, and I need you to secure the extraction zone. That is your mission. Insu wanted to argue further, but he knew it was pointless. Taemin had the council's support. The colonists were desperate, and desperate people did not ask questions about morality. "When do we deploy?" Insu asked. "Tomorrow morning." The expedition landed in 3 large transport ships, touching down at the edge of the Crimson Wastes. The soldiers established a perimeter immediately, setting up defensive positions and sensor arrays. The workers began assembling mining equipment and prefabricated structures. Within hours, they had built a fortified base camp. Within days, they had their first contact with the predators. A pack of 6 creatures approached the base camp in the early morning. They stopped at a distance, watching the humans with obvious intelligence. One of the soldiers raised his weapon, but Insu ordered him to stand down. "They're just observing," Insu said. "Don't fire unless they attack." The predators watched for an hour, their scales pulsing with colors that clearly carried meaning. Then they withdrew. "They're assessing us," Lieutenant Kyungsu said quietly, "trying to understand what we are and what we want." "Then they're smarter than I thought," Insu replied. The real trouble started when the mining teams moved into the predators' territory. The creatures attacked with coordinated tactics that shocked the soldiers. They used the terrain to their advantage, striking from cover and retreating before the humans could respond effectively. They targeted equipment and supply lines, not people. At first, Insu thought the predators were just defending their hunting grounds through instinct. But after the 3rd attack, he realized the truth. These creatures were using military tactics. They were thinking strategically, trying to make the human presence too expensive to maintain without causing enough casualties to trigger a full military response. They were trying to drive the humans away without starting a war. "They're negotiating," Insu said during the evening briefing. "In their own way, they're telling us to leave." "Then we need to be more aggressive," Taemin replied over the communication link. "Use the heavy weapons. Show them we're serious." The first major battle happened at dawn. A large pack of predators attacked a mining site, and the soldiers responded with everything they had. Plasma rifles, explosive rounds, and automated turrets turned the Crimson Wastes into a killing field. The predators fought back with terrifying efficiency. Their crystalline horns discharged electrical attacks that overloaded human equipment. They moved faster than anything that large should be able to move, and they coordinated their efforts with precision that suggested a hive mind. When the battle ended, 12 soldiers were dead and over 30 were wounded. The predators had suffered casualties too, but they had achieved their objective. The mining site was destroyed. Insu walked through the wreckage, his jaw tight. This was not a battle. It was a massacre on both sides. "Pull back to base camp," he ordered. "We need to rethink our approach." That night, one of the pilots did not make it back to base camp. Bora's transport had been hit during the retreat, and she had crash-landed several miles away. Insu immediately organized a rescue team, but they could not reach her position before dark. Bora knew she was going to die. She had survived the crash with only minor injuries, but her transport was destroyed, and night was falling. She had seen what the predators did to isolated humans. She sat in the wreckage of her transport, weapon in hand, watching the shadows grow longer. Then she saw something that made her heart stop. A woman walked out of the darkness, flanked by 2 massive predators. The woman was human, wearing a survival suit that had been modified with animal hides and strange decorations. Her hair was longer than regulation allowed, and her face was weathered by sun and wind, but it was definitely a human woman. "Don't shoot," the woman said in Korean. "I'm here to help." Bora lowered her weapon slowly, too shocked to speak. Behind the woman, more predators emerged from the shadows, dozens of them moving with coordinated silence. The woman made a gesture, and the predators stopped. She approached Bora alone. "My name is Jiwoo," the woman said. "I know you're from the colony ship." "What are you doing here?" "Jiwoo?" Bora repeated the name. "The xenobiologist?" "You're dead. They said you died 6 months ago. They said I was exiled. There's a difference." Jiwoo knelt beside Bora, checking her for injuries with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky. Nothing broken. Can you walk? How are you alive? How are you?" Bora gestured at the predators surrounding them. "How are you controlling them?" "I'm not controlling them. We're working together." Jiwoo helped Bora to her feet. "They're called the Vraken in their own language. And they're not animals. They're people, just not human people." One of the large predators approached and Bo-Ra tensed, but the creature simply looked at her with intelligent amber eyes, its scales pulsing with colors that seemed almost curious. "This is Elder," Jiwoo said. "She's the matriarch of this territory. She agreed to help me rescue you instead of killing you. You should thank her." Bo-Ra stared at the massive predator, then did something that felt insane. She bowed, the way she would to a respected elder in Korean culture. The predator's scales flashed with colors that seemed pleased. "Come on," Jiwoo said. "I'll take you back to the edge of your base camp perimeter. But first we need to talk." They walked through the darkness, surrounded by predators that moved like ghosts. Jiwoo told Bo-Ra everything. About her exile, about Taiman's lies, about the atmospheric toxins that were making the colonists sick. "The colony is dying," Bo-Ra said quietly. "People are getting sick, just like you warned. That's why we're here. We need the minerals to build better air processors." "I know," Jiwoo replied. "I've been watching. But taking Vrakan territory isn't the answer. They've lived here for thousands of years. This is their home. What else can we do? We can't go back to Earth. The journey took too long. Everyone we knew is dead or ancient. This is our only home now." Jiwoo stopped walking and turned to face Bo-Ra. In the starlight, her expression was hard. "There are other mineral deposits on this planet, regions where the Vrakan don't live, where you can mine without destroying their homes. I can show you where. But first you need to convince your leaders to stop this invasion." "I'm just a pilot," Bo-Ra said. "Nobody listens to me." "Then make them listen." Jiwoo pulled out a data chip. "This contains everything I learned about the atmospheric toxins, including a solution that doesn't require rare minerals. It uses local plants and simple chemical processes. It will take longer to implement, but it will work." Bo-Ra took the chip, staring at it like it was a miracle. "Why are you helping us? After what they did to you?" "Because innocent people are dying," Jiwoo said simply. "Because the colonists don't deserve to suffer for Taiman's mistakes. But if your people continue this invasion, if they keep killing the Vrakan, I will fight against you. Do you understand?" Bo-Ra nodded slowly. "I'll try. I'll do everything I can." "Good. Now go. Tell your captain that the Vrakan are offering peace. Tell him that if he wants to meet with me to negotiate, I'll be waiting at the river junction in 3 days. Come alone with no weapons." Bo-Ra stumbled back into the base camp just after dawn, escorted to the perimeter by predators that vanished like smoke when the guards spotted them. Her story seemed impossible, but the data chip was real. Captain Insu read the data with growing horror. Everything Jiwoo had. The chemical weapons launched at dawn, spreading poison clouds across the crimson wastes. But the Vrakan were not there. Jiwoo had seen the preparations. She had watched through borrowed eyes as the humans assembled their deadly arsenal. The Vrakan had scouts positioned around the human base, and they shared everything they saw through their network of scale patterns and vibrations. She had evacuated the packs 3 hours before the attack, moving them to safe zones in the mountains. The poison clouds drifted over empty plains, killing nothing but the red vegetation. Captain Insu stood in the command center, watching the tactical displays with a sick feeling in his stomach. Taiman had launched the attack without his authorization, using a direct code from the colony ship. "Sir," Lieutenant Kyung-soo reported, "the predators are gone. The entire area is empty." "She knew," Insu said quietly. "She knew we were coming." On the colony ship, the revelation of Taiman's crimes had divided the colonists into 2 groups. Some believed they should continue the surface operation, that survival justified any action. Others demanded Taiman's arrest and called for peace negotiations with the predators. The council was paralyzed, unable to make a decision. Taiman, cornered and desperate, made his final play. He sealed himself in the weapons control room and threatened to launch orbital strikes on the planet's surface. He would burn the predators out of existence if necessary. "I will not let animals and a traitor destroy everything we've built," he broadcast to the entire colony. "This is war now, and in war you do whatever it takes to win." But Taiman had made a critical mistake. He had underestimated the people he had manipulated for so long. Sung-ho, the security officer who had exiled Jiwoo 6 months ago, stood outside the weapons control room with his team. For months he had told himself he was just following orders, that he had no choice, that Jiwoo must have been guilty because the director said so. Now he knew the truth. He had sent an innocent woman to die because he was too cowardly to question authority. Director Tae-min, Sung-ho spoke through the door. Open this door. You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy and treason against the colony. You'll have to break in, Tae-min replied, and by the time you do, I'll have already launched the strikes. Those creatures will burn, and so will anyone standing with them. Sung-ho looked at his team. They were all thinking the same thing. How many more people would have to die because they followed the wrong orders? Breach the door, Sung-ho commanded. On the surface, Ji-woo stood on a cliff overlooking the human base camp. Around her, dozens of Vrakan pack leaders had gathered. She had called them here from across the entire continent, using the communication network they had developed together. Hundreds of Vrakans surrounded the human position, staying just beyond weapon range. They did not attack. They simply waited, a silent wall of predators that demonstrated power without violence. Elder stood beside Ji-woo, her scales pulsing with colors that asked a question. Do we attack? No, Ji-woo said. Not yet. Let them see us. Let them understand what they're facing. In the base camp, soldiers stared at the gathering predators with growing fear. They had fought small packs before and barely survived. Now they faced an army. Captain In-soo received a communication request on an open channel. When he accepted it, Ji-woo's face appeared on the screen. Captain, she said, we need to talk. You're Ji-woo, In-soo replied. The xenobiologist everyone thought was dead. I was supposed to die. Your director made sure of that. But the Vrakan saved me. They accepted me when my own people cast me out. Ji-woo's expression was calm, but her eyes were hard. Now I'm giving you one chance to avoid a war that will destroy both our peoples. What do you want? I want you to leave Vrakan territory. I want you to stop the mining operations that destroy their homes. In return, I'll show you other mineral deposits in regions where the Vrakan don't live. I'll share the atmospheric processing solution that will save your colonists without requiring rare minerals. And if we refuse? Ji-woo's expression did not change, but behind her, hundreds of Vrakan raised their heads and let their horns glow with power. The display was terrifying. If you refuse, the Vrakan will drive you off this planet. Every human. They'll destroy your equipment, your bases, your ships if they have to. They're willing to negotiate because I asked them to, but they're also willing to fight if that's what you choose. I don't have the authority to make that decision, In-soo said. Then find someone who does. You have 6 hours. Ji-woo ended the transmission. In-soo sat in silence for a long moment. Then he made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He opened a colony-wide broadcast channel. This is Captain In-soo, commander of the surface expedition. I'm addressing all colonists, council members, and military personnel. I have just spoken with Dr. Ji-woo, the xenobiologist we exiled 6 months ago. She is alive. She has been living with the predators, and she has something we need to hear. He played a recording of their conversation, then continued. I've spent 2 weeks fighting these creatures. I've watched good people die on both sides, and I've realized something important. These aren't mindless animals. They're intelligent beings defending their home. We're the invaders here, he took a deep breath. Director Tae-min launched this operation based on lies. He covered up the atmospheric toxins that are killing us. He framed an innocent woman and sent her to die. And now he's threatening to launch orbital strikes that will kill everyone on the surface, human and Vrakan alike, just to hide his crimes. I will not follow his orders anymore. I'm ordering all military personnel to stand down and prepare for peace negotiations. In the weapons control room, Tae-min screamed in rage and initiated the orbital strike sequence, but Sung-ho's team had finally breached the door. They rushed in, tackling Tae-min and pulling him away from the controls. The orbital strikes were canceled with seconds to spare. Ji-woo met Captain In-soo at the river junction as she had promised. She came with Elder and 2 other pack leaders. In-soo came alone as requested with no weapons. They stood on opposite sides of the river studying each other. You believed me, Ji-woo said. I saw your data. I saw what Tae-min did, and I saw how the Vrakan fought. In-soo gestured to Elder. They could have killed my people easily. Instead, they targeted equipment and supplies. They were trying to drive us away without massacring us. That's not how animals fight. That's how people fight when they want to avoid unnecessary killing. Ji-woo translated for Elder, and the matriarch's scales pulsed with colors that meant respect and recognition. Over the next 3 hours, they negotiated. Ji-woo translated between In-soo and the Vrakan leaders, bridging 2 species with completely different languages and cultures. But the basics of the agreement were simple. The humans would abandon the mining operations in Vrakan territory. Jiwoo would guide them to alternative mineral deposits and share her atmospheric processing solution. In return, the Vrakan would allow humans to settle in specific zones, away from sacred grounds and primary hunting territories. They would share the planet. They would learn from each other. They would try to build something new. "There's one more thing," Jiwoo said. "I'm staying with the Vrakan. I won't return to the colony." "Why not?" Insu asked. "You could clear your name. You could go home." Jiwoo looked at the Vrakan leaders who had accepted her without hesitation, and smiled. "I am home. These are my people now, both of them." Insu studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Then what are you? Human or Vrakan?" "Both, neither, something new." Jiwoo extended her hand across the river. "I'm a bridge. And if this is going to work, we need bridges." Insu crossed the river and shook her hand. Behind him, soldiers watched in amazement as their captain made peace with a woman who stood beside monsters. Behind Jiwoo, the Vrakan witnessed their goddess negotiate with the Sky People. History was being made. Director. Taemin was arrested and held for trial. Dr. Haijin was released from custody and pardoned for her role in revealing his crimes. She volunteered to work with Jiwoo on the atmospheric processing project, desperate to make amends. When Haijin first saw Jiwoo again, standing among the Vrakan like it was the most natural thing in the world, she began to cry. "I'm sorry," Haijin whispered. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you." Jiwoo looked at her former mentor for a long moment. The betrayal still hurt. It would probably always hurt. But she had learned something important from the Vrakan, that holding on to pain only made you weak. "I forgive you," Jiwoo said. "But I won't forget. Now, are you here to help or to apologize? Because we have work to do." They worked together to build the first atmospheric processors using Jiwoo's design. They established protocols for human-Vrakan interaction. They created the first integrated settlement where both species could live in proximity. It was not easy. There were incidents and misunderstandings. Some humans feared the Vrakan, and some Vrakan packs refused to trust the Sky People. But slowly, carefully, they built something that had never existed before. A civilization of two species living together as equals. Years passed. Jiwoo became known by both humans and Vrakan as Kivaren, the small goddess who had brought peace. She trained young humans and young Vrakan together, teaching them to understand each other. She mediated disputes and solved problems that